What happened to the children of John Denver? The golden-haired troubadour whose voice painted landscapes, whose lyrics breathed life into mountain valleys, and whose gentle spirit stood in defiant contrast to the chaos of celebrity. When he died suddenly in 1997, the world mourned a folk hero. But for three children, Zachary, Anna Kate, and Jessie Bell, the loss was far more personal. It wasn't the silencing of a legend. It was the shattering of a father. Each of them was raised not just in the glow of his music, but in the long shadow of a man who tried, in his own way, to live as simply as he sang. And yet, while the world remembers him for "Take Me Home, Country Roads," his children remember a different harmony. The quiet rhythms of real life, the private costs of public beauty, and the constant search for a life grounded in truth. Zachary John Denver was the first. Adopted in 1974 by John and his then-wife Annie Martell at the height of Denver's stardom. At the time, John was already a household name. "Sunshine on My Shoulders" and Annie's song had elevated him to a rare kind of fame. Not loud, not scandalous, but spiritual. The kind of fame that made people feel safe. But behind the soft melodies and homespun charm was a man constantly on the move. Tours stretched across continents. Studio sessions ran late into the night. And as John brought messages of peace and ecology to sold-out arenas, Zachary was learning what it meant to be the son of someone who belonged to the world. His childhood in Aspen was painted with two brushes. One was pastoral, snow-laced trees, open fields, a home filled with laughter and the hum of acoustic strings. The other was fractured, long absences, sudden silences, and a father who, while deeply loving, was also increasingly consumed by activism, fame, and later private pain. Zachary wasn't raised in Hollywood. He was raised in Colorado's quiet wildness, where his father found inspiration and where his mother tried to hold on to a semblance of normalcy as the demands of fame pulled them in separate directions. From a young age, Zachary showed no interest in the spotlight. He was thoughtful, inward, far more drawn to the real world than the stage. While other celebrity children gravitated toward modeling or music, he leaned toward service, not for applause but for impact. In his teenage years, while tabloids speculated about John's faltering marriage and shifting public image, Zachary stayed grounded. He studied. He listened. He watched his father's contradictions. The environmentalist who flew private, the gentle poet who could grow quietly distant, and understood early that people, even the most beloved, were layered. After John and Annie's divorce in 1982, Zachary split time between both parents, but it was clear he carried more than their names. He carried their burdens. His bond with his father deepened during the final decade of John's life, when the singer, no longer chasing hit records, began focusing more on family, reflection, and legacy. John spoke often about how much Zachary had taught him, about humility, about clarity, about what mattered once the cameras faded. And Zachary, for his part, never tried to become his father. He simply tried to be present for his mother, for his sister Anna Kate, and eventually for the causes that mattered most to him. As an adult, Zachary found his calling in policy and social work. He moved just down the road from Aspen to Basalt, Colorado, where he built a life far from fame. He married a woman named Jennifer, started a family, and turned his energy toward community advocacy and environmental issues. Not as a celebrity surrogate, but as a man shaped by values rather than headlines. His only major public appearance came in 2014, when he stood beside his siblings to accept John Denver's posthumous star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. He didn't speak much, but the moment said enough. His presence wasn't for the cameras, it was for the man he still called Dad. Today, Zachary lives quietly with his wife and son, away from the orbit of celebrity, yet still unmistakably part of a legacy built on beauty and belonging. His life reflects the core of his father's best songs, rooted in nature, simple in structure, profound in intent. He didn't inherit the guitar, he inherited the purpose, and that made all the difference. But as Zachary built a life of quiet impact, his younger sister, Anna Kate, would take a different road, one equally private, but forged through darker terrain. A daughter shaped by grief, pressure, and the invisible weight of living up to a name the world had already mythologized. Her story, more hidden than the others, holds a depth all its own, one of recovery, resilience, and rediscovery. Anna Kate Denver was adopted in 1976, 2 years after her brother Zachary, during the same season that John Denver was expanding his influence from folk stardom into global humanitarianism. By then, John had evolved into something larger than a musician. He was a symbol, the face of environmental advocacy, a goodwill ambassador, a beloved American voice whose music played like a prayer across living rooms and campfires alike. But at home in Aspen, the rhythm was far more fragile. His marriage to Annie was straining under the weight of constant travel, public scrutiny, and emotional distance. And as John poured his spirit into causes and concerts, Anna Kate was growing up in a house that looked like a sanctuary, but often felt hollow. From a young age, Anna Kate was the quietest of the Denver children, sharp, observant, but shielded. She was surrounded by beauty, the Colorado mountains, a home full of animals, a father whose love for the planet was matched only by his inner restlessness. But that stillness didn't always translate to stability. Her father's fame meant constant interruption. Fans at the gate, paparazzi in the snow, days where he was a hero to millions, and nights where he was simply gone. For Anna Kate, love meant learning to be self-sufficient, to carry her feelings quietly, and to observe more than she expressed. When her parents divorced in 1982, Anna Kate was only 6. The split wasn't just emotional, it was spiritual. John and Annie had been more than a couple. They were part of each other's mythology. Their love had been immortalized in lyrics, etched into record sleeves and serenaded across the world. But behind the music, the unraveling had already begun. John's battles with alcohol and frustration, with the constraints of fame, had grown. And when he eventually remarried and relocated part-time to California, Anna Kate found herself split across geography and emotional loyalties. In school, she thrived academically. She went on to attend Dartmouth College, excelling not only in the classroom, but as a competitive rower, a sport that mirrored her personality. Quiet, forceful, deeply disciplined. But beneath the achievements was a gnawing pressure that never quite left her. Being the daughter of John Denver came with its own unspoken demands. There was an expectation to be wholesome, to be grateful, to be emotionally generous in the same way her father's music had been. But grief doesn't fit neatly into legacy. After John's sudden death in a plane crash in 1997, Anna Kate was in her early 20s, old enough to understand the loss, but still too young to escape the storm that followed. She spiraled privately, away from cameras and headlines. In the years after his death, Anna Kate struggled with alcoholism, not as a rebellion, but as a quiet unraveling. She later connected the addiction to the emotional confusion of losing a parent who had always been both larger than life and slightly out of reach. Her recovery came not in grand stages, but in silent victories. Sobriety, stability, a decision to rebuild her life not around memory, but around meaning. Eventually, she found love, not in the public eye, but in New Zealand, thousands of miles from the press, the pressures, and the endless echoes of her last name. She married Jaime Hutter, a former investment banker turned conservationist, and together they built a life in Wanaka, a lakeside town surrounded by wilderness. There they opened a boutique eco-lodge, part retreat, part sanctuary, and started a family of their own, welcoming a daughter named Daisy Eloise. Anna Kate's days now are filled with quiet, the kind of peace her father sang about but rarely got to live. She hikes, she gardens, she raises her child in a world that values trees more than tabloids. Though she rarely speaks publicly, her life is a living tribute to the causes John Denver championed. She donates quietly to environmental organizations. She supports wildlife rehabilitation programs. And every so often, she'll contribute her voice, not to a song, but to a community initiative or a local conservation project. She never tried to become John Denver's daughter in the public sense. She didn't release an album. She didn't tour in tribute shows. What she did was something arguably harder. She stepped out of the myth and made something sustainable, something real. And in doing so, she honors her father not by reliving his story, but by reclaiming her own. And yet, the Denver legacy didn't end in the mountains of Colorado or the lakes of New Zealand. In 1989, a final chapter began. John's only biological child, born during his second marriage to Australian actress Cassandra Delaney. Her name was Jessie Bell, and her life would reflect the most artistic, free-spirited, and unfiltered essence of her father. A daughter born not into the rise of fame, but into the echo of it, carrying not just his name, but his sense of wonder. Jessie Bell Deutschendorf was born in 1989, the only biological child of John Denver, and the last to arrive in a life already overflowing with melodies, mountains, and personal contradictions. By the time she came into the world, John was no longer the wide-eyed singer on the brink of stardom. He was a man in transition, past the peak of his commercial fame, navigating a complicated second marriage, and wrestling more openly with the cost of a life lived in constant view. Jessie's mother, Australian actress Cassandra Delaney, had brought a burst of fresh energy into John's world, but their union, though passionate at first, would prove unstable. And so Jessie was raised in a space between two truths: the beauty of her father's world and the unpredictability of his presence. From an early age, Jessie was different, not just the youngest, but the most uncontainable. She showed an instinct for creativity that echoed her father's, but bent it toward her own direction. Where John turned his emotion into song, Jessie painted hers onto canvas, into jewelry, into abstract, natural forms. She didn't grow up under the same weight of public legacy that hovered over Zachary and Anna Kate. By the late 90s, the tabloids had mostly faded, and John had grown more introspective. He spent more time at home in Aspen and Santa Barbara, more time reflecting than performing. For Jessie, this meant she caught a version of him that her older siblings didn't always get, a father less consumed by momentum and more shaped by memory. But time was cruel. John Denver died in a plane crash when Jessie was just 8 years old, too young to fully grasp the scope of his fame, old enough to feel the silence he left behind. Unlike Zachary and Anna Kate, who grew up surrounded by the construction of his public persona, Jessie inherited only the aftermath, a swirl of grief, nostalgia, and myth. Her memories of him were real but partial: bedtime songs, walks through nature, stories told with that unmistakable voice. And when he was gone, what remained wasn't pressure, it was longing. As she grew older, Jessie turned inward rather than outward. She never sought to replace her father's legacy, but she never denied it either. She embraced the parts of him that had shaped her: his reverence for the earth, his belief in authenticity, his need for expression. She studied art and wellness, living part-time in Australia before returning to Colorado, where she rooted herself not in the music industry, but in the creative landscapes her father once sang about. Her work as a multimedia artist began to reflect that duality, grounded in natural elements, yet filled with emotional flight. In 2019, she married snowboarder Eli Legate in a mountaintop ceremony that felt more like a whisper than a spectacle. It wasn't a celebrity affair. There were no glossy magazine spreads or red carpet photo ops, just family, fresh air, and a feeling that something had come full circle. Today, Jessie lives quietly in Colorado, working as both an artist and a certified holistic health coach. She doesn't perform her father's songs. She doesn't license his image for commercials. Instead, she lends her voice to projects that honor the spirit, not the brand, of John Denver. She's helped support a Broadway musical in development and has contributed to a documentary preserving his environmental work and musical evolution. Not as a spokesperson, as a daughter who remembers. Each of John Denver's children carries a different piece of him. Zachary, the steady one, inherited his civic-minded purpose and deep connection to community. Anna Kate, the resilient one, transformed personal hardship into a life of quiet stewardship and strength. Jessie Bell, the expressive one, channels his artistic soul into a new kind of creation, less about chords and choruses, more about color and care. They don't live in his shadow, they live in his echo, and each, in their own way, has chosen a life that reflects not the fame he acquired, but the truth he always sought: to be close to the earth, true to themselves, and generous with whatever they were given. What remains remarkable is not how much they resemble him, but how deliberately they chose not to become him. They didn't replicate the fame, they redefined the legacy. While his name still draws crowds, his children move through the world as individuals, shaped by love, scarred by loss, but held together by something stronger than celebrity, by memory, by intention, by a family bond that survived the turbulence of fame and the finality of death. Jessie once said that her father's spirit lives on in everything they do, and watching the way each of his children has carved their own quiet path, through service, through recovery, through creation, it becomes clear the music never really stopped. It just changed form. If you found this breakdown powerful and want more deep dives into the hidden lives of Hollywood's forgotten children, subscribe to our channel. Your support brings these invisible stories to light. Thanks for listening.